Right, good afternoon, everyone. So we've had a full day of genuinely interesting presentations, and I'm hoping I can build on that with something a little bit different, but which I think ties into everything you've heard. So you may notice the world map on the slide. I've one just like it I bought in New Zealand years ago. What I like is it's a reminder that the way we see the world is just one perspective. And that's one of the core ideas behind systems thinking, the ability to step back, shift perspective, and see the wider system just rather than just the parts in front of us. And as you all know, in security that matters. The problems we deal with rarely sit in one box. They cut across people, processes, technology, politics. The moment you fix one thing, something else pops up over here. So in the next 20 minutes, I want to give you a way of thinking that helps you navigate that complexity with a bit more clarity and helps your teams do the same. Before we get into that, let me tell you a bit about the context where I'm coming from. As Rick said, my name's Simon Gocher. Started life as a chemist working at the Defence Science Technology Laboratory in the detection department. Worked on capability development, in-service support across the military and security user community. From there, I moved into government support to exports, working with UK physical and cybersecurity companies to sell internationally, and until recently was the Assistant Director for the security sector at the Department for Business and Trade. Along the way, I've also dived deeper into systems thinking, first through an apprenticeship, and now through teaching and advising students on the University of Exeter's Master's Programme. So while I've been lucky enough to study systems thinking academically, I do come at this as a practitioner first. I spent most of my career trying to make sense of messy situations, and systems thinking has definitely become one of the most useful tools I've found for doing that. And as security leaders, you're already thinking in those terms, how different parts of your organization work together, how people actually behave, and how one change over here creates problems over there. And what systems thinking can give you is a language and a discipline for that work. Something you can explain, you can repeat, and you can teach. So I'm going to do three things. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to systems thinking, why it's relevant to security, and then talk through a framework that will hopefully help you come across to use in the messy problems you have in front of you. This is a taster, not the full discipline. If it resonates, there's lots of things you can dive deeper into. So let's start with the basics. What do we actually mean by a system? So if we start with a simple definition, Government Office for Science describes a system as a set of elements or parts interconnected in such a way that they produce their own pattern of behavior over time. So that's why I've put a picture of a ship on the slide. Illustrates the different components working together and doing something that none of them can do in isolation. You don't get propulsion from a piston working on its own. It's the way those parts work together that creates the outcome, creates the system. But of course, that's only half the story. Because a ship isn't just machinery. It's also the crew. The engineers, the galley staff, the officers, etc. And all of them form another system with relationships, behaviors, dependencies, and they're just as important as the hardware. If the chef makes a mistake in the kitchen and accidentally poisons the captain, what's the impact on the smooth running of the ship going to be? And that's where systems thinking comes in. It's simply a disciplined way of seeing those interconnections, the structures, the behaviors, the relationships that sit underneath the surface of a complex situation. It's a collection of tools and approaches that help support us in thinking systemically about our work. Okay, so let's look at how that connects directly to the world that we operate in. Security is inherently systemic. Just as with my ship analogy, if you're trying to protect a critical national infrastructure site, you have a range of physical things at your disposal, the CCTV, access control, etc., as a set of hard systems. But you also have the softer systems that exist because of the staff who work there, the company culture, effective visitors, etc. So a quick show of hands, and no, don't worry, there's no test at the end. How many of you have come across systems thinking before? A few of you. And how many of you would identify as systems thinkers? Again, only a couple. That's interesting, because I think as security leaders, most of you are already systems thinkers. We're increasingly being asked to solve complex problems that don't have clear boundaries, owners, or solutions. And systems thinking provides that practical way to make sense of the complexity and act with confidence. So wherever you land, this session is designed to help you in one of three ways. If you already use this consciously, I hope it gives you a way to spread it throughout your teams. If you use it subconsciously, I hope it gives you a language, a vocabulary, a discipline to help you spread it. And if it's new, this should give you a practical starting point. This is a short introduction. Systems thinking in security according to Simon. A little bit of theory, but hopefully something you can weave straight into practice. So let's look at a simple framework, 9 lenses you can use to frame any complex security problem. So many people that have heard of systems thinking associate it with a particular methodology or an author. For me, that's like assuming that plumbing is just about learning how to use a spanner. Or if you learn a few chemical equations, suddenly you're a chemist. However, without a wider understanding and appreciation of the theory behind the tools, you'll never reach mastery. That's why I'll never be a very good plumber. And with that in mind, I'm not talking about particular methods today, I'm focusing on a framework. So Patrick Hofstad's a long-standing practitioner in the field, and his book, The Grammar of Systems, discusses a set of thinking patterns or principles that you can apply rather than teaching methods to follow. I find them really useful, and so what I'm sharing today is my take on his work, shaped by the environments I've worked in, hopefully useful to others in the security sector who are in the room. Bear in mind, it's not the answer to all of life's problems. I don't come here bearing a silver bullet. It's a checklist to help you when you pause and think. Just like when you're about to leave the house. Quick pat down, wallet, phone, keys, good to go. You still need to think, but this should help you do it. And as we go through each of the lenses, while I'll often talk about them in the context of a CNI site, these ways of framing issues work equally well if you manage a program or are designing policy, etc. So let's dive in. So this is one of the hardest concepts to explain, but one of the easiest to recognize when you see it. Emergence is about the result the system produces, not the individual components. When these parts are put together, the car will go. But in isolation, the components don't possess the property of movement. No single camera, guard, policy, or barrier makes people feel safe. Not many people would look at a bag scanner or the scanner we had downstairs and immediately feel safe. But when deployed properly, the combination of these tools and the procedures working together creates that sense of safety. And Emergence also explains why sometimes we get the outcomes that we didn't expect. The classic law of unintended consequences. In security, the thing we care about most, people feeling safe and being safe, is an emergent property of the whole system. So the real question is, what is the outcome the system is actually producing, and is it the one we intended? And once we start thinking about outcomes, the next step is to look at the whole system producing it. So this takes us to Holism. So this is the discipline of stepping back, seeing the whole, not just the bit in front of you. It's the opposite of reductionism, sort of breaking things into parts and sort of optimizing each one. Now that has its place in engineering, in chemistry, but it can be dangerous when you're trying to implement security. So as part of a trial years ago, we were looking at novel search and screening methods. A theme park had set up a rigorous bag search. It was great, ensuring the safety of the visitors who got into the park. Trouble was, it wasn't great for visitor experience, and by creating a long, tightly packed queue outside your front gate, which obviously, as some of the heads nodding in the room will know, you've suddenly created a mass casualty hazard. So that ability to step back and see the bigger picture is really important. Because security rarely sits at the center of operations. We're not part of the organization's purpose. We're usually a supporting system. So if we optimize our bit without understanding the wider system, we create friction or new vulnerabilities. Key question is one posed by the American systems thinker Russ Ackoff. Ask yourself, of what larger system are we a part? And so this forces us to think about how our actions ripple across the wider system. And once we started looking at the whole, the next question is, how are we understanding it? Which takes us to modeling. We're always modeling, subconsciously or consciously. The real world is too complex to hold in our head. And a model is just a simplified version of reality. that helps us act, helps us make sense of the complexity. We were talking about biases just now. Obviously, inherently, there's biases in that model that we make. If I asked you to set a table, you could do it instantly. You have a mental model of what a place setting looks like in your head. But that model might not be perfect if I asked you to set the table for a state banquet at Windsor Castle. It would get you started, but it's not perfect. And there's a famous quote by the eminent British statistician George Box. All models are wrong, but some are useful. So when we design a security system, we're modeling the threat, the attacker's behavior, the site layout, our own response, and those models shape every decision we make. The danger is in the assumptions, in the biases. If our model is wrong or outdated, our decisions will be wrong too. We need to remember the differences between reality and our model. The map is not the territory. And once we're modeling the system, the next question is, what have we included and what have we left out? And this is boundaries. Boundaries are everywhere. They define what's in the system and what's out, what we control and what's part of the wider environment. Some boundaries are fixed, the perimeter of our site, the scope of a contract. Others are chosen, the stakeholders we involve, the timeframes we consider, which risks we take responsibility for. It's these choices that shape everything we see. Is the public road outside the gate in scope? If yes, what measures might be put in place to push that threat further away? If no, then who do we have to influence to help us? The boundary is determining the risk owner. And where you stand relative to a boundary also impacts what you see. People at the center of a crowd see a certain thing around them. They see one picture of what's ahead. People at the edge see something different. Their position will affect their behavior. And the challenge for us is that when boundaries are drawn unconsciously, things fall between the cracks. It's the classic, not my problem, Gov. So as with most of these lenses, the skill is to acknowledge that boundaries exist and to use them positively. Which brings us to the fact that once we've drawn a boundary, we've made a distinction. And the distinction creates a difference. And this lens is about leverage. What is the intervention that will actually shift the needle in the system? Now, some people will naturally often assume the answer is more security, more barriers, more checks, more layers. But as we know, more isn't always better. The biggest improvement might come from better vetting or onboarding procedures or enhancing training, rather than adding another camera. And often, the real leverage point is behavioral. A small nudge in how people can act can have a disproportionate effect on the whole system. So what is the difference that will make a difference? And once we've identified that intervention, what impact does it have on everything else? So our next lens reminds us that the systems behave through relationships, not components. So this interconnection was explicit in the definition of a system that I showed you earlier, and it's the interactions that matter more than the parts. It is the and rather than numbers in this quote by the 13th century philosopher Rumi. And in security, the relationships between teams often matter more than the technology that you're using. A top-of-the-range CCTV system is useless if the control room operators can't operate it and they can't provide information to other teams to use it effectively. And for anyone who's ever done a lessons learned exercise, most failures aren't technical. They come from how people interacted. Misunderstandings, assumptions, handovers, gaps between teams. And equally, we know that often when really good work comes out of a project, it's because they've been delivered in spite of the system, because people are working together and good relationships are formed. So the skill here is to focus our energies on the way the parts of a system interact and relate to each other, rather than getting drawn into the parts and the things themselves. Now, relationships lead to cause and effect. Now, some of this is linear. X leads to Y. But most systems don't behave in straight lines. They behave in circles, feedback loops that reinforce or balance behavior. So a reinforcing loop amplifies the behavior. For example, more visible security can reduce hostile reconnaissance, which in turn reduces threat activity, which again reinforces the value of the visibility in the first place. However, a balancing loop, like the one on screen, pushes back. If you increase security checks too much, you increase friction. The increased friction means that leads people to find workarounds. People finding workarounds reduces the effectiveness of your security, so the system is pushing back. You then put more security controls in place, and we keep going round and round in a spiral. Loops create the dynamics of the system, the patterns we see over time. They explain why some problems persist, why some interventions fail, and why some behaviors keep coming back. If we don't understand the loops, we end up treating the symptoms instead of the causes. Now, this cyclic behavior is relatively simple to see in a simple system like we've got here. But once we add in a few more moving parts, suddenly we're dealing with a complex system. And that's what real life is about. And so complexity, this lens is about the sheer number of interconnected elements that we're dealing with, the dense web of interactions that we have in daily life. The CNI site isn't just about guards and gates. It's contractors, deliveries, weather effects, intelligence updates, tempo, maintenance, all interacting at once. It's this dynamism that's causing the complexity. How can we understand, let alone manage, all the possible states within a system? We can't. It's something we have to learn to navigate. Just as when we talked about modeling, we need to reduce the complexity that we ask our brains to handle and design processes that can flex, adapt, and absorb change. If the environment has 100 possible states and we only have 10 possible responses, we're going to lose. We need to match the potential attack vectors of an adversary in order to provide effective security. Terrorism, espionage, single-issue activists, they'll all behave differently. So our security posture needs to match or exceed theirs. With the World Cup, if you put that into a sporting context, most tactics employed in team sports are based on the concept of creating a mismatch in numbers in order to advance or score points. That's the attackers creating greater variety than the defenders. So once we accept that complexity is unavoidable, we also acknowledge that we'll never have the full picture. And so the final lens is about the discipline of making decisions where the information is incomplete, ambiguous, or constantly changing, just like we heard from our comms professionals earlier. And in security, we rarely have the perfect intelligence. We don't know the intent, the capability, or the timing with certainty. Yet we still have to act. Good security is designed to function under that uncertainty. It doesn't rely on perfect information. It relies on resilience, adaptability, and good judgment. We're constantly balancing competing risks, incomplete data, and shifting threats. So this is about reminding us to design systems that remain effective, even when the picture is blurred. A great story from Eurotunnel, work did years ago, we did some trials, and the security manager said they only ever received 2 types of letter from passengers. The first one, why was I delayed? You have far too much security. Second letter, why did no one search my car properly? You don't have enough security. Nothing had changed in the system. But even with that well-designed system, there's no pleasing some people. And so with a minute to go, that brings me to my final slide, a checklist and a way to bring all of those 9 lenses together. So I'm hoping this is a useful takeaway for you. I've tried to distill all that theory and nuance into a set of questions that bring those 9 lenses together. And as I said earlier, this isn't a method, it's a way of thinking. It's a way of framing messy problems so you can think and act with more clarity and confidence. Now, if this resonates, there's a whole academic field, methodologies that put this into practice, as well as a whole community of practitioners. Come and have a chat if you want to explore it further. I hope this gives you a new way of seeing the work that you already do. Thank you very much.